On the Track is a web TV show about cryptozoology, natural history, green issues and whatever else the team feel like making up as they go along. Enjoy!
Nuneaton, the jewel of the South Midlands, the town who gave us such great men as George Eliot and Larry Grayson, the throbbing heart of this teeming metropolis, the pearl of the CV13 postcode, down by the roundabout and up the one-way system, is Nuneaton Town Hall, where we can find none other than Nuneaton's Mr. Entertainment.
Hello ladies and gentlemen and boys and girls, I'm Barry Tadcaster and this is my friend Ken Jevons, who is an Orang Pendek. Hello, my name is Ken Jevons and I am an Orang Pendek. Unlike the other Orang Pendeks, I do not come from the Indonesian island of Sumatra. I come from the London borough of Lewisham, where I am employed by Lewisham Town Council as an ombudsman. So, Ken, what's happening on the show today? Oh well, on the show today we have got John of Damascus, and he is going to be reading to us from his treatise on the serpents of the Libyan desert that grow to a prodigious size and are bloated with venom and lie in wait in the cool oases for men and cattle and the wild beasts of the desert upon which they batten.
Erudition, that's what this show's all about.
I really like the old credits.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's John Downs. I'm the director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, and welcome to another episode of On the Track. For those of you who don't know, twice a week you can tune in and watch me holding forth on the subjects of hard science, weird shit, and surreality. What's surreality? Well, this is really. Surreality can be described as the state of being incongruous or surreal. Some synonyms for surreality are dreaminess, fancy, fantasy, fiction, fictitiousness, irreality or unreality. This episode is very much an odds and sods episode because we haven't done a roundup episode for some time, and there are all sorts of things that we need to bring you updates on. So, first of all, I want to bring you an update from the Deputy Director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology, my old friend Graham Inglis, who really didn't approve of the way that we described the classic kids comic The Beano in an episode a couple of weeks ago.
The Beano back in the 50s and 60s had quite a few things in it which would cause offence these days, such as making fun of fat children and also lots of incidents of bullying in it. Yes, but the thing is, these days it's not only stepped away from that kind of stuff, it's gone way beyond that into areas of virtue signalling and just promoting lots of aspects of what you might call woke culture these days. And I think therefore it's just a travesty of what it used to be.
And of course it could be argued that this is why we are rapidly becoming a nation of Walter the Softies. And now I'd like to go over to Hampshire, where a friend of the show, Shane Pike, has been doing some research of his own. He and I have been talking about relic populations of mystery animals in the New Forest, and he sent me this. 25 or so years ago, I wrote a book called The Smaller Mystery Carnivores of the West Country, in which I looked at the possibility that various species of British smaller carnivore, which were believed to have been extirpated from the south of England, had in fact survived. And one of the animals that I looked at was this, a creature called the pine marten, which is largely believed to be Britain's rarest carnivore and has supposedly been extinct in England since between 1870 and 1900. Now, this all goes back to 1977, when a paper by Langley and Yalden called The Decline of the Smaller British Carnivores was published. This is an updated one with a slightly updated title that dear sweet Richard Muirhead found for me online. Richard Muirhead and my other friend Nigel Wright are probably the two best truffle hounds I know. They're just like those weird dogs that they set loose into French woodlands to find truffles, except I set those two out into archives and they come back with the most amazing collection of odds and sods that you would never have expected. And this is the fruit of one of Richard's investigations for me. Now, according to Langley and Yalden, pine martens were extinct in England by the turn of the 20th century. And here we must have a little interjection from Computer Boy.
Don't call me Computer Boy!
Who is on the other end of my iPad down the ether and has got something important to say.
John, young people don't need pine martens. We like all our furniture flat packed, made of MDF and from IKEA.
Louis, you're a bloody idiot.
John, you can't say that. It's a hate crime.
However, there's an awful lot of circumstantial and anecdotal evidence to suggest that this wasn't the case at all. And, for example, in a children's book called The Lure of the Falcon by Gerald Summers, he describes how, when on holiday in the Lake District in the years before the Second World War, he saw a family of pine martens, which even then he knew were incredibly rare. But that was 90 years ago, and they were still found rarely in the Lake District in what is now Cumbria. But accepted wisdom, as described by Langley and Yalden, said that they were extinct in the south of England by the turn of the 20th century. Well, in my researches, which were finally produced into this book, Smaller Mystery Carnivores of the West Country, I showed that there was anecdotal and circumstantial evidence suggesting that pine martens were found in Devon, Somerset, Cornwall, Dorset, Hampshire, possibly in Wiltshire, and even in Surrey. And I produced anecdotal evidence for each of these. In recent years, the last 15 years or so, English Nature have announced that relict populations of pine martens are indeed found in various parts of England where they hadn't been seen for over a century. However, much to my chagrin, although the broad brushstrokes of my thesis has been confirmed, pine martens have survived till the present day, there have been no evidence to suggest that they are in any of the places where I said they were going to be. In fact, that's not quite true. This picture is of a pine marten found dead in Devon a couple of years ago. but it was found under mysterious circumstances, and allegedly at least it had been microchipped, which suggests that it was a official or unofficial introduction from a place in the United Kingdom where the Vincent Wildlife Trust reintroductions of pine martens are going strong. But apart from that, there's been no evidence to suggest that my assertions of exactly where pine martens would be found in England are true. Well, thank you very much, Shane, for this. I missed it when it first came out, because this is evidence that at least until 2021 there were indeed a small population of pine martens in the New Forest in Hampshire. So I'm at least partly right. Let's see what the next few years bring us. And now to go over to another friend of the show, and another old friend of mine, Bob Skinner, who sent me this really interesting story from Texas. Bob saw this story on Sharon Hill's Weekly Weird News. Now, Sharon is a lady for whom I have an awful lot of time. She's a fine researcher, and she sticks to a broadly sceptical viewpoint, but does so with style and humour. She has had bad times with various members of the cryptozoological community over the years, but I'm glad to say that I'm not one of these people, and that she and I have always had a cordial and friendly relationship. And I'm very grateful that she posted this story and then that Bob in turn saw it and sent it to me, because as you probably know, I've been interested in these blue dogs in Texas since 2003, I think, was the first time that I heard about them. And I've been to Texas on 3 occasions, most recently with my late wife 12 years ago, when we stayed with Richie and Naomi West, who did a fantastic job helping us carry out our researches. And this has been a subject that's interested me for a long time, particularly because an awful lot of people have, due to a misunderstanding, decided that these things are chupacabra. Well, the chupacabra is this, and it's been reported from the Canovanas Plateau on Puerto Rico, a place I've been twice looking for it. And this is what I've called a Texas blue dog, and it's rather fun to see that my terminology has now been taken over by various people in the media. Cop a load of this. Whilst these things are certainly some sort of canid and have nothing at all to do with the chupacabra, which I do believe exists and for which I have got a reasonably cogent zoological explanation, and if you want to know more, I will no doubt be talking about it on this show at some point, but otherwise you can look in my book, The Island of Paradise, which was published way back in 2007. But these sightings of the Texas blue dogs are fascinating, not because I think that they are a new species in themselves. I think that they are almost certainly a mixture of various canid species suffering from some disease closely allied to sarcoptic mange. But the interesting thing is the fact that when there have been DNA tests done on specimens which have been secured, most famously the 2 secured by Dr. Phyllis Canyon in Texas, the DNA tests have shown conclusively that at least part of the DNA makeup of these creatures is Mexican wolf. Well, the Mexican wolf, which is the smallest and probably the oldest subspecies, is not just extinct in the wild, but even when it was found in the wild, was not found anywhere near the parts of Texas where these specimens were recovered. Something else that's always intrigued me are these pads of flesh which are found on the haunches, I like to say on the buttocks, but dogs don't have buttocks, of predominantly male specimens of the Texas blue dogs, even though more recently we've had at least one female specimen show them, and we have now had 2 domestic dogs exhibiting this. Now, I was always very intrigued by these, but the most recent specimen of a domestic dog with this type of growth suggests that the growths are infected tissue, infected gland tissue, which is actually completely different from what Dr. Canyon said of her specimen pictured here. I can't give any more details of the most recent domestic dog exhibiting this syndrome because of patient confidentiality, but it is very interesting that they are now being seen in domestic dogs, and it will be very interesting to see what happens in the future. Will they be seen in other dog species, for example the red fox? So once again, the story of the Texas blue dogs isn't over, and once again it throws up far more questions than it does answers. Thank you very much indeed, Bob, for finding this for me. Well, you may remember that a couple of months ago we had my old friend Richard Muirhead on the show, and he was telling us all about how he had just come back from a trip to the British Library in London, where he had unearthed an enormous amount of interesting cryptozoological material. Carry on, Richard, what have we got next?
A strange mystery pig-like animal in Malaya, or Malaysia as it now is.
Tell us about the pig-like animal.
I'll
That
read.
sounds very weird. Really?
I found this story in the Times of India, January the 17th, 1954. Another strange animal caught, Malayan jungles. The jungles of Perak State, in which mysterious ape men were seen last month, have produced another thing, which is baffling zoologists. It is an animal described as having the fierce look of an old wild boar, short legs and a stiff tail, which seldom moves, and a thick wrinkled skin. It was found in a drain near the Tanjong Malim rest house, not far from the jungle-clad main range of Perak State. The Singapore Standard yesterday published a photograph of the animal and reported that since its capture it had spent most of its time sleeping. That's the end of it.
Well, I think your next job is going to be to find the Singapore Standard for that date.
Yes, I will try and do that.
And he did exactly that. And within a few days we had a copy of the original newspaper article with the picture. But as you can see, the picture is really badly degraded, and for all practical purposes it's worse than useless. So, what do we do next? Well, as I think I've mentioned at least 150 million times in this web TV show, I really don't like social media. I think social media is responsible for a large proportion of the ills of the modern world, but it does have its uses. So we put out a request on Facebook in my daily blog to ask for people in Malaysia or with contacts in Malaysia who would like to volunteer their time to help solve this mystery. And we had 2 answers back. The first one was from a guy in Sabah called Alan. And again, although I loathe the bloody stuff with a vengeance, social media is, once again, very useful. And here I am setting up a discussion group, which eventually I'm going to call something like Mystery Animal in Perak, but at the moment it's just got my name, Alan's name and Richard Muirhead's name. And I'm setting up this discussion group so the three of us can decide how to proceed further. I will be joining Gary, who is the other guy who offered his time and contacts. I'll be joining him to the group soon as well. But one thing at a time, as my dear old mother used to say. I've never been very good at time zones, and so whilst Richard is here and ready to join in the discussion, Alan, being something like 8 hours in front of us on the other side of the world, is quite presumably asleep in his feather and flip, as Richard's granddad calls it. But I'm sure he will respond eagerly once he gets this message from Richard. There are two reasons I've shown you this. Partly because it's an interesting story, and I always try to bring you interesting stories, but also because I wanted to underline the fact, if it needed any underlining, that we don't just talk the talk, we walk the walk as well, and we have people all over the world who help us in our researches. We may not be as exciting as those people who run around the forest saying, "There's gonna be a goddamn Sasquatch in that tree there," but I think we do the job better. But only time will tell in this particular story, so watch this space.
If you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe, follow our Facebook page and check out our Patreon.
And as the ghost of Joe Strummer, who's an ever more regular visitor to my little studio, wants me to remind you, always press the notification bell. Otherwise you won't be told when there's a new show to watch. And that would be an awful pity, wouldn't it? Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's about it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd like to say a big thank you to Shane Pike, to Bob Skinner, and to Graham Inglis, and to Richard Muirhead, all of whom worked very hard and did their own inimitable things as part of this show. I want to say a big thank you to our producer Louis, and to everybody else who's involved in the CFZ, both in front of and behind the scenes. I feel very honoured to be running this organisation like I have been for the last 30 years, and I want everybody to know that I feel very grateful for everything that you all do for us. Please continue to support us, and we'll be back next week. What's happening next week? Well, on Wednesday, I do know actually what's happening on Wednesday. No, I don't. I have absolutely no idea what's happening Wednesday or Saturday because I haven't filmed them yet. But I will be doing soon. And so I can promise you there will be something happening next Wednesday and the next Saturday. So if you're there, sitting down in your best bibs and tuckers, ready to watch me, I'll be seeing you.